She flinched when he touched her shoulder. That was his first clue. The second clue was the bruise. Dark purple, the size of a man's fist, crawling up the side of her neck, just barely hidden beneath the collar of her chef's coat. And the third clue, the way her hands trembled when she realized he'd seen it. Alexei Volkov didn't say a word. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even change his expression. He just looked at her and asked one question. "Who did this to you?" And with those 5 words, he set into motion a chain of events that would destroy 3 lives, save 2 others, and remind the entire city of Boston why you never, ever hurt someone under Alexei Volkov's roof. But here's the part nobody expected. The man who put those bruises on her, he wasn't just some random boyfriend. Well, he was connected to people who would make this situation far more dangerous than anyone anticipated. And by the time Alexei discovered that detail, it was almost too late. Stay with me until the very end. This story will leave you speechless. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories like this, do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button, tap the like, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It takes 2 seconds and it helps more than you know. Now let's get into it. Boston in November is a cruel place. The wind comes off the harbor like a blade, slicing through wool coats and brick walls alike. The trees along Commonwealth Avenue stand bare and skeletal, their branches clawing at a sky the color of wet concrete. It's the kind of cold that doesn't just chill your bones. It settles into them, makes a home there, and refuses to leave until April. But inside the Volkov estate in Beacon Hill, the cold didn't exist. The house, if you could call it that, occupied an entire corner of Lewisburg Square, the most exclusive address in Boston. From the outside, it looked like old money. Red brick facade, black iron railings, bay windows that reflected the gray November sky like polished mirrors. It blended in perfectly with the historic row houses on either side, the kind of homes that belong to senators and trust fund heirs and university presidents. But behind those elegant walls, the Volkov estate was a fortress. The windows were bulletproof glass, custom fitted to look identical to the original 19th century panes. The front door was reinforced steel beneath its mahogany veneer. Every room had cameras. Every hallway had sensors. And every person who entered, from the dry cleaner to the accountant, was logged, photographed, and vetted by a security team that answered to one man and one man only, Alexei Volkov. At 47 years old, Alexei Volkov was the most powerful man in New England's criminal underworld, and he had held that title for nearly 2 decades. He ran an empire that stretched from the shipping ports of Boston to the casinos of Connecticut, from the construction unions of Providence to the pharmaceutical distribution networks that fed half the eastern seaboard. But if you saw him on the street, you might mistake him for a college professor. He was tall, 6'2", but lean, not bulky. His dark hair was always neatly combed, threaded with silver at the temples. He wore reading glasses when he reviewed documents. He preferred charcoal suits, no tie, top button open. He spoke softly. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. Because Alexei Volkov had learned something early in his career that most men never understand. The quieter you speak, the harder people listen. He had been born in St. Petersburg, Russia, in 1979. His father, Grigory Volkov, was a mid-level enforcer for a Bratva syndicate who drank too much and hit too hard. His mother, Irina, was a piano teacher who smelled of lavender soap and played Chopin when the neighbors fought. She was gentle. She was kind. She was the only person in Alexei's childhood who made him feel like the world wasn't entirely made of concrete and broken glass. When Alexei was 11 years old, his father came home drunk on a Tuesday night angrier than usual. Something had gone wrong with the job. Money was missing. Someone had disrespected him. The details didn't matter. The result was always the same. Alexei was in his bedroom when he heard the first crash, then the second, then his mother's voice. Not screaming, never screaming, because Irina Volkov had learned that screaming only made it worse. She pleaded. She reasoned. She apologized for things that weren't her fault. And then there was a sound that Alexei would carry with him for the rest of his life. A single sharp crack, like a tree branch snapping in a storm. He ran to the kitchen. His mother was on the floor, her left arm bent at an angle that arms are not supposed to bend. Her face was white. Her eyes were glassy with shock. And his father stood over her, swaying, already reaching for another bottle. Alexei didn't cry. He didn't scream. He walked to his mother, knelt beside her, and held her hand while they waited for the ambulance. He was 11 years old, and something inside him crystallized in that moment. Something cold and hard and permanent. He made a promise to himself that night. He would become so powerful that no one would ever hurt the people he cared about again. And if someone did, if someone was foolish enough, cruel enough, arrogant enough to lay a hand on someone under his protection, he would make them wish they had never been born. That promise had carried him from the streets of St. Petersburg to the docks of Boston. It had fueled every alliance, every acquisition, every calculated act of violence that built his empire. And it was the reason that 36 years later, the bruise on his cook's neck made his blood run cold. Her name was Elena Navarro. She was 31 years old, and she had been Alexei's personal chef for almost 3 years. She had come to the estate through an unusual path, not through the criminal network, not through a family connection, but through a restaurant. 3 years earlier, Alexei had been dining at a small, unremarkable trattoria in the North End, the kind of place tourists walk past without noticing. No sign out front, no menu in the window, just a plain wooden door between a barber shop and a dry cleaner. But the food was extraordinary. Alexei had ordered a simple dish, pappardelle with braised short rib. When it arrived, he took one bite and set down his fork. He called the waiter over. "Who made this?" he asked. The waiter pointed toward the kitchen. "Elena, she's new." Alexei walked into the kitchen. Elena was at the stove, her back to the door. She was small, maybe 5'4", with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and forearms that showed the scars of 1,000 kitchen burns. "The pappardelle," Alexei said. Elena turned around. She had no idea who he was. "What about it?" she asked. Not rude, just direct. She was busy. "I want to offer you a job. Private chef. My home. I'll triple whatever you're making here." Elena studied his face the way she studied ingredients, carefully, looking for what was beneath the surface. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm happy here. This is my kitchen. The owner gave me a chance when no one else would." Alexei respected the answer. He left a card on the counter and walked out. 3 months later, the restaurant closed. Gambling debts. Elena found Alexei's card in the bottom of her knife bag. She called the number, and she'd been cooking for him ever since. In 3 years, Elena had earned something that very few people in Alexei's world ever achieved: his trust. She was in his home every day. She saw him before the armor went on, just a man in reading glasses drinking black coffee and scanning the news. She knew his routines, his preferences, his moods. And Alexei noticed things about Elena too. He noticed that she hummed Celia Cruz songs when she thought she was alone. He noticed that she always packed extra portions of food into containers that she took with her when she left. He noticed that she worked with a quiet, fierce pride that reminded him uncomfortably of his mother. He noticed everything. That was his nature, which is why, on a gray Tuesday morning in November, when Elena came into the kitchen wearing her chef's coat buttoned all the way to the collar, something she never did, Alexei noticed immediately. He was sitting at the kitchen island, as he always did at 6:30, with a cup of black coffee and his tablet. Elena came in through the side entrance carrying a canvas tote bag of produce from the Tuesday farmer's market. Heirloom tomatoes, fresh basil, a block of Parmigiano Reggiano wrapped in wax paper. "Good morning," she said, maybe slightly quieter than usual, but normal. "Morning." She began unpacking, placing each item in its designated spot with the precision of someone who had organized this kitchen 1,000 times. But Alexei was watching her hands. They were shaking, not the normal tremor of someone carrying heavy bags in the cold. This was different. And this was the kind of shake that comes from inside, from adrenaline still circulating, from muscles that haven't unclenched since the night before. Elena reached up to place basil on the top shelf. Her sleeve slid back an inch, a ring of bruises around her wrist, purple and black, the unmistakable imprint of fingers. Someone had grabbed her, hard. Elena caught him looking. Their eyes met for half a second, just long enough for Alexei to see the flash of something. Not fear, something worse. Shame. She pulled her sleeve down and turned back to the counter. Alexei set down his coffee cup. "Elena," he said, quietly, the way you'd speak to someone standing on a ledge. She didn't turn around. "Yes? Come here. I need to start prep. You have a lunch meeting at noon and—" "Elena." Something in his voice made her stop. It wasn't a command. It was gentleness, coming from a man who was never gentle. She turned around slowly. She stood on the other side of the island, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere between Alexei's coffee cup and the edge of the counter. Alexei studied her. The collar of her chef's coat was buttoned tight, but he could see it, the edge of the bruise creeping above the white fabric. Dark purple, almost black at the center. Fresh, less than 12 hours old. "Your collar," he said. Her hand went to her neck. "It's nothing. I burned myself. The oven door—" "Elena." His voice was almost a whisper now. "That's not a burn." Silence. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. A single tear escaped from Elena's left eye. Alexei removed his reading glasses and set them on the counter. He folded his hands in front of him, and then he asked the question that would change everything. "Who did this to you?" Elena didn't answer right away. She stood there gripping the counter, fighting the battle that only people in her situation understand. The battle between the truth and the story, between asking for help and protecting the person who hurt you, between the need to be saved and the paralyzing fear that speaking up will make things worse. Alexei waited. He didn't push. He didn't repeat the question. He just waited, with the patience of a man who knew that silence was more powerful than any threat. "It's nothing, Mr. Volkov. Please, I just need to work." "You need to sit down," Alexei said. He pulled out the stool next to him and patted the seat once. "And then you need to tell me the truth." Something in his expression, maybe the fact that his eyes held no judgment, no pity, just a calm, steady certainty, broke through her defenses. She sat down, and then she told him everything. His name was Marco Pineda. He was 34 years old, and he had been Elena's boyfriend for about a year. They had met at a cooking supply store in the South End. He was charming, handsome. He told her he was a freelance contractor. Renovations, remodeling, that kind of thing. He had a warm smile and an easy laugh, and he made her feel, for the first time in a long time, like she wasn't alone. For the first 4 months, Marco was everything Elena had hoped for. He brought her flowers. He showed up with coffee when she was shopping for kitchen equipment. No, he told her she was the most talented person he'd ever met. Then slowly things began to shift. It started with small comments. The dress she was wearing was too revealing. The male server at the restaurant where they had dinner was flirting with her. Didn't she notice? Why was she spending so much time at work? Didn't she care about their relationship? Then the comments became accusations. She was seeing someone else. She was lying about where she went. She was spending too much time at the Volkov estate. What kind of woman spends 14 hours a day in another man's house? The first time he grabbed her was 6 months in. They were arguing about her work schedule. She tried to leave. He seized her arm and yanked her back so hard she stumbled into the kitchen table. He apologized immediately, tears in his eyes. It would never happen again. It happened again. A shove, a grabbed wrist, then a slap, then a fist. But what Elena told Alexei next made his jaw tighten in a way she'd never seen before. "Last night was different," she whispered. "He came to my apartment. He'd been drinking. He said he drove past the estate and saw a man's car parked outside. He said I was sleeping with someone here." Her hand went to her neck. "He grabbed me by the throat, pushed me against the wall. I couldn't breathe. I thought—" She stopped. "He held me there for almost a minute. My vision started going black. And while he was choking me, he said something." "What did he say?" Alexei asked. Elena looked at him directly for the first time. "He said, 'I know who your boss is. I know what he does. And if you tell anyone about this, I'll make sure Volkov finds out you've been stealing from his kitchen.' Who do you think he'll believe? His cook or the guy who can prove it?" The kitchen went very still, not because of the threat against Elena, but because Marco Pineda had used Alexei Volkov's name. He had invoked it as a weapon against someone in Alexei's own household, to keep her silent, to keep her afraid. He had turned Alexei's reputation, the very thing that was supposed to protect the people under his roof, into a tool of abuse. And that changed everything. "Where does he live?" Alexei asked. His voice hadn't changed, not 1 degree. But Elena had been around Alexei Volkov long enough to know that the less he showed on the surface, the more was happening underneath. "Mr. Volkov, please, I don't want trouble. I just need to—" "Elena." His voice was calm and almost gentle, but beneath it was something immense, like deep water with a powerful current running beneath a still surface. "You have been in my home every day for 3 years. You have fed me. You have taken care of me. You are under my roof. That makes you mine to protect." He leaned forward slightly. "Now, where does he live?" She gave him the address. Alexei didn't move immediately after Elena told him. He didn't make a phone call in front of her or summon his men while she watched. Instead, he did something that surprised her far more than any display of power could have. He stood up, walked to the espresso machine, and made her a cortado. Exactly the way she liked it. A double shot with a thin layer of microfoam, served in the small ceramic cup she always used. The blue one with the chipped handle that she refused to throw away because it fit her hand perfectly. He had watched her make it for herself 100 times and memorized every detail without ever mentioning it. He set the cup in front of her. "You're not going back to your apartment tonight," he said, "or any night until I tell you it's safe. There's a guest suite on the 3rd floor. Marta will have it ready within the hour." "Mr. Volkov, I can't just—" "You can. You will. That's not a request." Elena opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. There was something in Alexei's tone that made argument feel pointless. Not because he was threatening, but because he was right, and they both knew it. "Now," Alexei said, putting his reading glasses back on and picking up his tablet as if this were just another Tuesday morning. "Hey, I believe you mentioned a lunch meeting." What were you planning? The shift was so seamless, from the man who had just silently declared war on her behalf to the man asking about his lunch menu, that it almost made her laugh. Seared branzino, she said, her voice still raw, with roasted fennel and a lemon caper sauce. Make it for 2 extra. Dmitri and Sasha are joining. And just like that, the morning continued. But Elena noticed something. When Alexei left the kitchen 20 minutes later, he paused at the doorway. He turned back and looked at her. A long, steady look that carried a weight she couldn't name. "Elena," he said. "Yes, no one will ever touch you again." He said it the way other people say good morning, as a simple statement of fact. Then he walked down the hallway, and Elena heard him make a phone call. She couldn't hear the words. She didn't need to. But what Elena didn't tell Alexei, because she didn't know, was that Marco Pineda wasn't just a freelance contractor who drank too much and hit too hard. Marco Pineda was the nephew of Sal Pineda, and Sal Pineda was a mid-level enforcer for the Coretti family, a rival organization out of Providence, Rhode Island, that had been testing Alexei's territorial boundaries for the past 2 years. The Corettis weren't powerful enough to challenge Alexei directly, but they were ambitious, reckless, and always looking for leverage. Marco had never told Elena about his uncle. He had never told her about the family business. He presented himself as a simple working man with simple problems. But the truth was more complicated and far more dangerous. Because when Alexei Volkov sent his men to visit Marco Pineda, he wasn't just confronting a domestic abuser. He was pulling a thread that connected to a much larger web. But we'll get to that. First, let's talk about what happened when Dmitry Sokolov knocked on Marco's door. At 11:45 that morning, 3 black SUVs left the Volkov estate. They moved through the streets of Boston with quiet precision. No speeding, no running red lights. Just 3 vehicles in loose formation, blending with the city's endless stream of black cars and corporate sedans. In the lead vehicle sat Dmitry Sokolov, Alexei's head of security. Dmitry was 53 years old, a former Spetsnaz operative who had served 2 tours in Chechnya. He was built like a refrigerator, broad, square, impossibly solid. His face bore the evidence of a violent life. A scar that bisected his left eyebrow, a nose broken and reset at least 3 times, and eyes that held the flat, assessing calm of a man who had long ago made peace with the things he was capable of. The SUVs pulled up to a triple-decker apartment building in East Boston. Marco Pineda's apartment was on the 2nd floor. Dmitry sent 2 men to cover the back exit. Then he and 2 others walked up the front stairs. 3 solid, unhurried knocks. Marco opened the door wearing sweatpants and a stained white t-shirt, holding a beer at 11:45 in the morning. He was a big man, 6 feet tall, with thick arms and a face that might have been handsome once, but had been coarsened by alcohol and anger. He looked at Dmitry, then at the men behind him. His expression cycled through confusion, a recognition of danger, and then the belligerence that certain men default to when they're afraid. "Who the hell are you?" "Mr. Pineda," Dmitry said, his voice conversational, almost pleasant. "My name is Dmitry. I work for Alexei Volkov. May we come in?" The color drained from Marco's face. Everyone in Boston knew that name. Every bartender, every contractor, every small-time hustler knew the name Alexei Volkov, the way medieval peasants knew the name of the king. I haven't. "We just need to have a conversation," Dmitry said. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that made the temperature drop. "It won't take long." They entered the apartment, small, messy, stale beer, leftover takeout, a television playing a sports recap, dirty dishes piled in the sink, a punching bag in the corner, its surface cracked and worn from heavy use. Dmitri looked at the punching bag, then at Marco's hands, knuckles raw, skin split. "Please sit down, Mr. Pineda." Marco sat. His right leg was bouncing. His grip on the beer can was turning his knuckles white. Dmitri sat across from him and placed his hands on his knees. "I'm going to tell you a brief story, and then I'm going to ask you a question. The answer to that question will determine how the rest of your day goes. Do you understand?" Marco nodded. "Good. This morning, a woman came to work at the home of my employer. She is a valued member of his household. This morning, she arrived with bruises on her neck and her wrists, bruises that were not there yesterday." Dmitri paused, letting the words settle. "My employer noticed these bruises. My employer is a very observant man. While he is also a man who takes the welfare of the people under his roof very, very seriously." Marco's face had gone from pale to gray. "Now," Dmitri continued, "here is the question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer, because there is only one correct response." He leaned forward. "Did you put your hands on Elena Navarro?" The apartment was silent. Marco's eyes darted between Dmitri and the two men standing behind him. You could see the calculations in his face, the denials forming and dissolving, the desperate search for an exit that didn't exist. And then Marco did something that Dmitri did not expect. Instead of cowering, instead of confessing, Marco leaned back on the couch. A strange, reckless grin spread across his face. The grin of a man who thinks he has a card to play. "Yeah," Marco said. "I hit her." "So what?" Dmitri blinked. "Once." "She's my girlfriend," Marco continued, his voice gaining confidence. Liquid courage and stupidity mixing together in his bloodstream. "What happens between me and her is our business. And before you do anything stupid, you should know something." He leaned forward, pointing a finger at Dmitri. "My uncle is Sal Pineda. You know that name? He works for the Corettis out of Providence. You touch me, and Uncle Sal finds out, and then the Corettis have a problem with your boss. Is that really what Volkov wants? A war over some cook?" He said the word cook, like he was spitting out something rotten, like Elena was nothing, like she was a thing to be used and discarded. Dmitri stared at Marco for a long moment. His expression didn't change, not even slightly. Then Dmitri did something that Marco would remember for the rest of his life. He laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh or a threatening laugh. It was genuine. The laugh of a man who had just heard the funniest joke of his week. "Mr. Pineda," Dmitri said, wiping the corner of his eye, "I have worked for Alexei Volkov for 22 years. I have watched men far more powerful than your uncle, men who controlled armies, governments, shipping empires, sit across from me and make threats. Do you know where those men are now?" Marco didn't answer. "Neither does anyone else," Dmitri said. The laughter was gone. His voice was ice. "That is the point." He stood up. "You asked if this is what Volkov wants. Let me tell you what Volkov wants. He wants the woman who cooks his meals to come to work without bruises on her neck. When he wants the people in his household to feel safe. And when someone interferes with what Volkov wants, whether that person is a Providence Street boss or the President of the United States, Volkov corrects the situation." Dmitri took one step closer. He towered over Marco, who was still sitting on the couch, the grin long gone, the color long drained. "As for your Uncle Sal and the Corettis, my employer will deal with them in his own time, in his own way. That is not your concern. Your concern right now in this moment is very simple." He crouched down so he was at eye level with Marco. "Your concern is me." What happened next took less than 4 minutes. Dmitri didn't use weapons. He didn't need to. He was precise and methodical, the way a surgeon is precise and methodical. every action calculated, every consequence measured, and enough to ensure Marco Pineda would never forget this conversation, not enough to require medical attention. Dmitri had decades of experience calibrating that exact line. When it was over, Marco was on the floor of his living room, curled into himself, breathing in shallow gasps. The beer can lay crushed on the carpet. The television still played its sports recap, oblivious. Dmitri straightened his jacket. He hadn't even loosened his tie. "Here is what happens now," Dmitri said, standing over Marco with the calm authority of a man reading a train schedule. "You will not contact Elena Navarro. You will not go near her apartment. You will not speak her name. You will not drive past the Volkov estate. If you see her on the street, you will cross to the other side and keep walking." Marco made a sound that might have been agreement. "I'm not finished," Dmitri said. "You will leave Boston. You have 72 hours. I don't care where you go. Midwest, West Coast, another country. But in 72 hours, if you are still within the borders of Massachusetts, I will come back. And when I come back, Mr. Pineda, I will not be in a talking mood." He left a burner phone on the kitchen counter. "One number programmed. If we hear you violated any of these terms, that number rings, and I answer." He walked to the door and paused. "One more thing. You used my employer's name to frighten that woman into silence. You used his reputation as a weapon against someone in his own home. I want you to understand that of everything you've done, the hitting, the choking, all of it, that is the thing that offended him most." The door closed behind them. Now, most stories would end there. The bad guy gets what he deserves, the victim is safe, and the powerful man rides off into the sunset. But this story isn't most stories, because Marco Pineda, bleeding and humiliated on his apartment floor, did the one thing Dmitri didn't anticipate. He called his uncle. Sal Pineda was not a smart man, but he was a proud one. He was 58 years old, squat and thick-necked, with the build of a retired dock worker and the temperament of a junkyard dog. He had worked for the Coretti family for 30 years, never rising above mid-level, never smart enough for strategy, but useful enough for enforcement that they kept him around. When Marco called, sobbing and raging about what Volkov's men had done to him, Sal didn't hear a nephew who had beaten his girlfriend and suffered the consequences. He heard disrespect. He heard a rival organization putting hands on his blood. He heard an opportunity to prove his value to the Corettis by escalating a conflict that no sane person would escalate. Sal made 2 phone calls. The first was to his boss in Providence. The second was to find out where Elena Navarro lived. Because in Sal Pineda's small, vicious mind, the equation was simple. Volkov hurt my nephew over a woman, so I hurt the woman to send a message back. It was the logic of a stupid man playing a dangerous game, and it set into motion the worst 48 hours of the Coretti family's existence. 2 days after Dimitri's visit, on a Thursday evening, Elena stayed late at the estate to prep for a weekend dinner party Alexei was hosting. She finished at 9:30 and called a car, and Alexei had insisted on a private car service for her. No more buses, no more walking alone at night. The car dropped her at her apartment in Jamaica Plain at 10:15. She climbed the stairs, unlocked her door, and stepped inside. The lights were off. She reached for the switch. A hand grabbed her wrist. She didn't scream. The sound caught in her throat, trapped by the same paralysis that had frozen her 100 times before when Marco's hands had come at her in the dark. But it wasn't Marco. It was a man she'd never seen before. Thick-necked, squat, smelling of cigar smoke and cheap cologne. He shoved her backward into the apartment and kicked the door shut behind him. "Sit down," the man said. His voice was flat, bored almost, like this was routine. "Who are you?" Elena's voice was shaking, but she didn't sit. She was backing toward the kitchen, toward the knife block on the counter. "I'm Marco's uncle," the man said, "and I'm here to deliver a message to your boss." Elena's stomach dropped, not because she was afraid, she was terrified, but because she understood in that instant that this wasn't about her at all. This was about Alexei. She was just the messenger, the expendable one. Sal Pineda took a step forward. "Here's how this works, sweetheart. You're going to call Volkov. You're going to tell him that the Correttis want to sit down to discuss territorial boundaries in Saudi and the docks. And you're going to tell him that if he doesn't agree within 24 hours, the next person who shows up at this apartment won't be as polite as me." He smiled. It was a wet, ugly smile. "Or," he said, reaching for her arm, "I can just leave him a more visual message." Elena's back hit the kitchen counter, and something happened inside her that she didn't expect. Something that had been building for months, through every bruise Marco had left, through every night she'd spent covering marks with makeup, through every morning she'd walked into Alexei's kitchen, pretending everything was fine. All of that fear, all of that shame, all of that swallowed rage, it didn't freeze her this time. It ignited. Elena's hand closed around the handle of the 10-inch chef's knife on the magnetic strip behind her. She brought it up in a single fluid motion, the same motion she used to break down a side of beef, the same muscle memory that had been trained by 15 years of professional kitchen work, and pressed the blade flat against Sal Pineda's throat. Not cutting, not stabbing, just resting there, cold and steady, against the soft flesh beneath his jaw. Sal froze. "Here's how this actually works," Elena said. Her voice wasn't shaking anymore. It was low and even and absolutely steady, and it surprised her as much as it surprised him. "You're going to take 3 steps backward, you're going to walk out that door, and you're going to deliver your own message." Sal's eyes were wide. He hadn't expected this. He had expected a cowering woman, a crying woman, a woman who would do whatever he said, because that's what women in his world did. He had badly miscalculated. "Tell Marco," Elena continued, the knife unwavering, "that I'm done being afraid of small men. And tell the Correttis that if they want a conversation with Alexei Volkov, they should have the courage to ask him directly. Not send a man to threaten a woman alone in her apartment at 10 o'clock at night." Sal swallowed. He felt the blade move against his Adam's apple. "And tell them one more thing," Elena whispered. "Tell them that the cook is the one who held the knife. Not Volkov, not his men. The cook. And that should scare them more than anything else. Because if the cook isn't afraid of you, imagine what her boss will do." Sal took 3 steps backward. His hands were raised. His cigar had fallen from his fingers and was smoldering on the linoleum. He opened the door. He didn't say a word. He just left. The moment the door closed, Elena's knees buckled. She slid down the kitchen cabinet till she was sitting on the floor, the knife still in her hand, her whole body shaking. The adrenaline that had turned her into someone she didn't recognize was draining out of her like water from a cracked vessel. She looked at the knife in her hand, the same knife she used every morning to julienne carrots and dice onions and break down whole chickens. The same knife she had sharpened religiously every Sunday evening, because a dull blade was more dangerous than a sharp one. It was the first good knife she had ever owned. A Japanese steel gyuto that she had saved for 3 months to buy when she was still working at the trattoria. It had never occurred to her that the same hands that made Alexei Volkov's meals could also hold a blade to a man's throat and mean it. She sat there for 2 full minutes. The apartment was silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock and the faint sound of traffic below. The smoldering cigar on the linoleum had gone out, leaving a small black mark on the floor. Then she picked up her phone and called the only number that mattered. Alexei answered on the first ring. He always did when it was her. "Elena, it's late. Is everything—" "Someone was in my apartment," she said. Her voice was steady again. "Barely. Marco's uncle. He works for the Corettis. He wanted me to deliver a message." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence so complete and so controlled that it felt like the air pressure in the room changed. "Are you hurt?" Alexei asked. His voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. "No." I held a knife to his throat and told him to leave. Another pause. Longer this time. "Osh, you did what?" "I held my chef's knife against his neck and told him to get out of my apartment." Elena heard something she had never heard before in 3 years of working for Alexei Volkov. He laughed. It was a short, surprised sound, not the polished, controlled chuckle he used in business meetings, but a real, genuine laugh of pure astonishment. "Stay exactly where you are," Alexei said, the laughter fading into steel. "Dmitri will be there in 8 minutes. I will handle the rest." He hung up, and Elena, still sitting on her kitchen floor with a chef's knife in her lap, realized something that changed the way she thought about herself forever. She had spent a year being afraid, a year hiding bruises, a year making excuses, a year believing she was too small, too weak, too powerless to fight back. But when it mattered, when a man twice her size walked into her home and tried to use her as a pawn, she hadn't called for help. She hadn't frozen. She hadn't cowered. She had picked up a knife and she had handled it. What Alexei Volkov did in the next 24 hours sent a message that would be discussed in whispered tones across the criminal underworld of the Northeast for years to come. He didn't start a war with the Corettis. That would have been reckless, and Alexei was never reckless. Instead, he made a phone call. One single phone call to Don Coretti himself. Anthony Coretti, the 71-year-old patriarch of the Providence family. Alexei made the call from his study at 11 o'clock at night. The room was dark except for the amber glow of the desk lamp. Dmitri stood in the corner, arms folded, watching his boss with the quiet attention of a man who had seen Alexei dismantle empires with nothing more than a telephone and a steady voice. Alexei dialed the number. It rang twice. "Anthony," Alexei said. No greeting, no pleasantries. Just the name, spoken with the flat calm of a man stating a fact. "We need to discuss something that happened tonight." Nobody knows exactly what was said during those 11 minutes, but Dmitri, who was in the room, would later tell his closest associates that he had never, in 22 years, heard his boss speak that way. Not louder, not angrier, quieter. Alexei's voice had dropped to a register that was almost gentle, the way a father might speak to a child who had done something very, very foolish. And that, Dmitri said, was when he knew the Corettis were finished. Because Alexei Volkov didn't yell when he was angry. He didn't threaten. He didn't posture. When Alexei Volkov was truly furious, he became the calmest person in the room. And the calmer he got, the more dangerous things became. Here's what happened afterward. By Friday morning, Sal Pineda had been permanently dismissed from the Coretti organization. Not retired, not reassigned, dismissed. Stripped of his position, his protection, and his income. The word that came down from Anthony Coretti himself was unambiguous. Sal Pineda no longer exists to us. He was left with nothing but a clear understanding that if he ever surfaced in the Northeast again, neither the Corettis nor anyone else would lift a finger to help him. By Friday afternoon, Anthony Coretti himself called Alexei's office and delivered a personal apology, not through an intermediary, not through a lawyer, but directly, man to man. He expressed his profound regret that a member of his organization had threatened a civilian woman in her own home. He offered compensation. Alexei declined it. By Friday evening, Marco Pineda was gone from Boston, not just relocated, vanished. His apartment was empty. His phone was disconnected. His landlord found the keys on the kitchen counter and a month's rent in cash in an envelope. No forwarding address, no goodbye. The message was clear. Alexei Volkov had not escalated the situation. He had not started a war. He had done something far more devastating. He had made a 71-year-old mob boss apologize. And in doing so, he had demonstrated the kind of power that violence can never achieve. The power of a man so feared and so respected that even his rivals would sacrifice their own people rather than risk his displeasure, all because of a bruise on a cook's neck. A week later, on a Thursday evening, Elena cooked dinner for Alexei, as she always did. Roasted chicken with herbes de Provence, fingerling potatoes, a winter salad with pomegranate seeds and toasted walnuts. She was drying the last pot when Alexei appeared in the doorway. He looked tired, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, reading glasses perched on his head. He retrieved the plate she left for him and sat at the island. He ate in silence. Elena should have left. Her day was done. She stayed. They sat in comfortable quiet for several minutes. The house was still. The city hummed distantly beyond the bulletproof windows. "Mr. Volkov," Elena said. "Alexei," he corrected. It was the first time he'd invited her to use his first name. She hesitated. "Alexei." "Yes? Why did you help me?" "The truth, not the version you tell your men." He set down his fork. He considered the question with the same seriousness he gave everything, not rushing to fill the silence with an easy answer. "Because I know what it looks like," he said, "when someone is hiding a bruise they didn't earn." Elena waited. She could tell there was more. Alexei was quiet for a long moment. His eyes were distant, looking at something beyond the kitchen walls. "My mother," he said. "She was a piano teacher. She played Chopin. She was the gentlest person I have ever known. And for years, she hid bruises behind long sleeves and high collars and excuses about kitchen accidents." He paused. "She thought she was protecting me by hiding it. She thought if I didn't see, I wouldn't know. But children always know, Elena. They know when the air in a house is wrong. They know when a silence is the dangerous kind." Elena's eyes were glistening, but she didn't look away. "I was 11 when he broke her arm. I sat with her on the kitchen floor and held her hand while we waited for the ambulance. I promised myself that night that I would become powerful enough to make sure it never happened again. Not to her, not to anyone I cared about." He looked at Elena directly. "I failed with my mother. She stayed with him until his liver gave out in 1998. 18 more years. I had the power by then to end it, but she wouldn't let me. She said it was her cross to bear." His voice was perfectly controlled, but Elena could hear the fracture lines beneath the surface, hairline cracks in a wall built to withstand anything. "When I saw that bruise on your neck," Alexei said, "I wasn't just looking at you. I was looking at her. And I decided that this time I wouldn't fail." The kitchen was very quiet. "But Elena, I need you to hear this. What you did in your apartment with the knife, that matters more than anything I did." Elena looked at him surprised. "I made phone calls," Alexei said. "I sent men. I leveraged power that I've spent decades building. Any man with enough money and enough soldiers could do what I did. But you were alone. No army, no reputation, no one coming to save you. And you picked up a knife and you saved yourself." He held her gaze. "My mother never did that. She never believed she could." And that's the thing that haunts me most. Not that I couldn't protect her, but that she never learned to protect herself. You did something in that apartment that my mother never had the chance to do. You fought back. Elena reached across the island and placed her hand on top of his. A small gesture. 3 seconds. But in those 3 seconds, something shifted between them. Not romance, not attraction. Something deeper and more fundamental. Recognition. The recognition of two people who understood the same kind of pain and the same kind of strength. Alexei looked at her hand on his. He didn't pull away. "The chicken is exceptional, by the way," he said after a moment. Elena laughed. Elena won a real laugh, the first one in months, and the sound of it filled the kitchen like sunlight breaking through clouds. "It's just a simple roast," she said. "Nothing you make is simple, Elena. I believe I've mentioned that." 6 months later, Elena Navarro was still cooking for Alexei Volkov. But everything else had changed. She had moved into a beautiful apartment in Back Bay, paid for with a salary Alexei had increased without discussion. She had filed a restraining order against Marco Pineda, supported by a legal team that Alexei's foundation provided. The Volkov Foundation, Alexei's legitimate charitable organization, had also quietly reached out to two women in New Jersey, Marco's previous victims. One of them had an 8-year-old daughter who had witnessed the abuse. The foundation covered their therapy, their legal costs, and helped them relocate to a safe neighborhood with good schools. No strings attached, no contact from Alexei directly, just help appearing in their lives like a door opening in a wall they thought was solid. Elena had also started something new. With Alexei's encouragement and financial backing, she was developing a plan for her own restaurant, a small, intimate space in the South End, the same neighborhood where her career had started. She was designing the menu, sourcing suppliers, meeting with architects. She was building something that was entirely her own, and every morning she still arrived at the Volkov estate at 6 o'clock. She still made Alexei's coffee before he came downstairs. She still hummed Celia Cruz songs when she thought she was alone. And Alexei still sat at the kitchen island with his tablet and his reading glasses, the two of them sharing the comfortable silence of people who had seen each other at their most vulnerable and chosen not to look away. One morning as she plated his breakfast, a mushroom and Gruyere omelet with fresh chives from the garden, Alexei looked up from his tablet. "Elena." "Yes?" "The restaurant. Have you decided on a name?" She smiled. It was a warm, unguarded smile, the kind she had almost forgotten how to make. "Irina's," she said, "after your mother." Alexei went very still. His reading glasses slid down his nose, and he didn't fix them. He didn't speak for several seconds. When he did, his voice was rougher than usual. "She would have liked that," he said. "I know she would have," Elena replied. "Because she raised a man who still hears Chopin when the world gets loud." Alexei looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his fork and took a bite of the omelet. "Perfect," he said quietly. "As always." And outside, the November wind howled against the bulletproof windows of the Volkov estate. But inside the kitchen, it was warm. And that, my friends, is the story of a bruise, a question, a chef's knife, and a man who proved that true power isn't measured by how many people fear you. It's measured by how fiercely you protect the people who matter. But let me tell you what really makes this story different. It's not what Alexei did. Powerful men protect people every day. It's easy when you have an army behind you. What makes this story unforgettable is what Elena did. Alone in her apartment, no bodyguards, no backup. Just a cook, a knife, and the decision to stop being afraid. She didn't wait to be rescued. She rescued herself. And then she picked up the phone and let Alexei finish what she'd started. That's not weakness asking for help. That's strength knowing when to fight and when to call in reinforcements. Alexei Volkov was many things: a criminal, a kingpin, a man who operated in shadows. But on a gray Tuesday morning in November, when he saw a bruise on his cook's neck, he didn't see a business problem or a liability. He saw his mother, and he did what he wished he could have done 36 years ago. He asked one question, and then he made it right. Now I have to ask you, if you were in Elena's shoes, would you have picked up that knife? And if you were Alexei, would you have made that phone call to the Carettis? Guys, drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story moved you, if it made your heart race or your eyes sting even a little, please smash that like button. It tells the algorithm to share this story with more people who need to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story. I drop new ones every week, and each one hits different. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know who's hiding a bruise, and you never know who's one knife away from finding their courage. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.